Okay, hello everyone and welcome back to my custom position. What's your decision? This is going to be the third video on theory in the 1F4 line. So to recap, what we've looked at so far is we've looked at F4, C5, again 5. We've looked at this line like this, and we've concluded that this isn't the best way for black to play. We've also looked at another line which is C6 and bringing the knight to f5, for example, b5, for example, like this, and we found that that is better. But in this video, what we're going to be going through is we're going to be going through f4 knight e6, and so this move knight e6, it's a very interesting move, and the idea is that after white plays f5 to go for their same sacrifice, we play knight takes g5. And so this is a gambit of a piece. So I've called this the Halloween gambit, like as a reference to the chess opening Halloween gambit where a knight is sacrificed. And in this opening, the main idea is that it's weakening this black sacrifices a knight to weaken this f6 pawn. And white's going to have a hard time defending this, so black's going to have an easier time sacrificing pieces to free their queen and bishop. So before we get into that, just like to quickly show a couple of sidelines. So first of all, if white doesn't want to play into this knight takes g5 sacrifice, white can just play f3 on move 2 instead. And a sample that the game can go is like this, bishop e2. And a lot of openings with this in this position, we don't want to take a sacrifice pawn, because after knight d4, g4, bishop b5, knight d3, and c6, black is threatening to either take on d5, or if d5 takes, then rook's going to take, and it's going to eye this f6 pawn. So this is a way that white can play, as well as another sideline. If white plays f5, black doesn't need to take. So black can also play knight d4. G4 defends the f5 pawn, e5, f4, c5, and that's kind of how the game can go. So black has a knight on d4. It's pretty strong. The bishop could come to b5, or the knight could go to b5. White could take this bishop at some point or kick it out with the move e3. That's kind of how this game can go. So now let's get into the main part of this opening, which is after f5, black takes on g5. So knight g5 is the Halloween gambit. So basically, after knight takes g5, we need to protect our f6 pawn. So we have to accept the gambit. King takes g5, d5. So d5 is looking to get the rook to d8, and then d6, and then to sacrifice on f6. So white has to be very active in terms of defending their f6 pawn. So they can go f4 over here. So f4 is a multi-purpose move. First thing, it wants to bring the knight to f2 and then g5 in order to defend this f6 pawn, but also the bishop is threatening to come to d4, which would be able to take on this pawn as well as reinforce the f6 pawn. So c5 is played to block bishop d4, and now rook f3 can force the move d4, and then e4 is played as the main move over here. So you might be thinking that white should play e3, as this was a common move before, like in not the knight takes g5 variation. So I'm just going to quickly go over e3. So if e3, rook d8, and we can't take on d4 yet, but if we play knight f2, then g takes h5, we have to play e4 because the rook is threatening to go to d6. After takes, and bishop c6, we see that our knight is going to fall, and then rook d6 is going to be coming next, and our f6 pawn is falling. So we can't really play e3 comfortably like we could in the other position. So instead, what we're going to do is that we're going to play e4. So if black takes, then we get if black takes, then we get rook takes e3, and we're gonna be able to sacrifice first to free our pieces. So black can't do that. So there are two main moves here, bishop d7 and bishop b5. So let's look at bishop d7, the main line first. So we play g4 to protect this f5 pawn more. c6 is played. We play knight d3, so we're just developing our pieces, and now we play e5 to defend our f6 pawn. So knight c7, knight hf2, knight d5. So we can see that black is, after white played e5, black is able to get a strong knight on d5, which protects c3 as well as it attacks our f6 pawn. So this is a very strong move. And as we can see, there's a lot of pressure. So right now, black can't free their queen. They need two pieces to be attacking the f6 pawn. So they have one in the knight as well as the queen, but like two pieces other than the queen. So white plays knight e4, bringing their knight to the center and also protecting their f6 pawn. Now bishop c7 is played, looking to go to d8 and add an extra attacker on the f6 pawn. And so over here, before I show the next move, it's worth noting that white is kind of in a struggle of piece moving. So they have this d3 knight is a strong knight that's actually helping to protect these two pawns, which would be weak. Like if the knight was not there, then maybe even rook takes e5, and after f takes e5, bishop takes e5, and the f6 pawn is going to fall. So this d3 knight kind of has to stay on d3, as well as this e4 knight has to stay over here because it's defending on f6. So basically, white's center is completely blocked with its two knights, which are frozen. And because this d3 knight is blocking on c3, blocking the c3 pawn, and also black has lots of defenders over it, white actually cannot free their queen in this position. And because their knights block the center, white can't really make much progress over here. This is why I think this is quite good for black, though of course still playable for white. So now, first I'm going to show instead of rook f2, the main move, I'm just going to show, so let's say white just tries to tries to sacrifice, right? So black is just moving their pieces around, and if we take, knight takes over here, and after rook takes, we free our queen. Nope, queen takes f6 check, e takes f6, bishop takes f4 check, and g5 check, knight takes f6 is mate. So we can see that black is able to get their sacrifice off, and even if they didn't, white's actually just black's also able to get their sacrifice off and checkmate white because of white's weak king. So we can't make a sacrifice like this. So instead of bishop f2, we have rook f2, and basically the move that you make right now doesn't matter as much. What we want to do is basically in this position, white has to concede that black is going to be able to get their sacrifice off. So eventually black is going to play bishop to d8, and it's going to be able to take on f6, because after bishop f8, they have too many pieces attacking on f6. So we're going to see that. So I'm just going to show a few more moves. So black sets up an optimal sacrifice in white. And so what's important for white to do here is develop their pieces, so that white put a bishop on f3, and then also to try to control the e file as much as possible. Because once black sacrifices, the two things that are going to matter most are activity and control over the open files. So if white does this, then white can hold up after a sacrifice. If white kind of just moves back and forth and does nothing, then after a sacrifice, black will have more activity and control over the files, so black will actually win. So we see here that white controls the e file, and then so note that black over here doesn't have to take right now because because white can't do anything. As I said before, these two knights can't move. Like, they're actually well placed, but they can't really move. And if the knights can't move, then white can't use the file. White basically can't move this king out, or else the sacrifice is going to be better. So white can't really do anything. So actually, if black wants a draw here, black can just move back and forth, and there's nothing that white can do. But if black wants to play for a win, black can get off the sacrifice. So black's going to sacrifice a knight. Knight takes, bishop takes, rook takes, and then rook d6. As you can see over here, there's no way for white to stop the sacrifice because just black had all their pieces, almost all their pieces, hacking. So the king moves back, queen check, pawn g5. Actually, it's worth noting that if queen takes f5, then after bishop g4, this c8 bishop is going to fall. Looks like the queen is trapped, but the queen actually has d5, and then we take. So that's not good. So black cannot take. So the queen goes back to d8. So black has freed their queen, and they're going to free their they're going to free their bishop too. It's worth noting that if we try to like keep the bishop from being freed, then rook takes f6, and if we take queen takes f6 as mate, so we can't play f6 to block the bishop in. And at this point, black has got so many defenders over c3 that we can't sacrifice. We just have to accept that we're not going to get our pieces out, but white should try to use their activity and their extra pawns as a promotion threat to counter black's extra piece material. We have g4, g takes f5, the king moves back, and we have f6 to free the bishop, takes, f takes g4, h takes g4, rook takes f6. So as we can see over here, some pawns have been traded off, and white has extra pawns, but is down pieces if we don't count the queen and bishop that white has that are trapped. So now let's do a material count. So the way this works is because white's queen and bishop are going to be trapped, we can't count all these black pawns. We can't count these black pawns over here on this side because they're not going to go anywhere unless they're going to free these two, queen and bishop. So we're going to count. So this is 3. So bishop is 3, 6, 11, 20, 21 points for black, and 5, 8, 11, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 for white. But white does have some promotion plans, so it's a bit more even than the material count says. So let's go for it. So white can play g5 on rook e8. So here the theory isn't forced or anything like that. This is kind of a sample of play and how this can go. So white doesn't want to trade off their material. They want to bring a knight to a good square. And bishop f2. So this was actually playable for both sides, and probably is going to be white's best shot in this variation. So let me go back a few moves. So actually, if we just look at this position over here, we see that black is up material, but the material is kind of not active, and white has a very strong knight on e5, as well as their bishops are pretty strong. Black has 2 bishops of the same color, which won't be as strong as 2 bishops of opposite colors, and white's pawns are pretty safe. So black doesn't really have any immediate sort of attack over here, but they are up material if we do the counting the way that I showed. So let's go back some moves. Green takes. So this is if this sacrifice gets played. So I'm going to go back to move 12. So yeah, after bishop e2. So yeah, so instead of rook f2, which we played, this was kind of a move to develop the bishop to f3. But if we play bishop to e2 instead, we can see that so black does this sort of maneuver to get the bishop back to c8, which is a good square so that this rook can be more active. So it's kind of a setup that black can play. This is sort of like another example of how a sacrifice game can play. So you'll see the same sort of plan happens with the rook to d6. One thing to note over here is the rook on g5 is more poorly placed than it was on the e file. So so you'll see the same sort of. So over here is actually an interesting move. If black takes, then we actually have we have bishop takes c3, and this knight so after it takes, well, actually takes are going to be mate. after queen takes d3 check, and here in mate, I'll just show the mate. So we can't really take, and then the rook is going to be lost. There's no discovered checks that the rook has. So after rook e3 takes, we bring our rook to e8. Rook takes h6. Bishop e6 blocks the rook. We play g5, h4, and so in this position, it's knight e5 is, we can play knight e5 over here. So let's count the materials. So we have 5, 8, 11, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 points for white, and we have 3, 6, 11, 20, 21, 22, 23 for black, if we count the material this way. And but you notice over here black has kind of more of an attack over white, and white's pawns are a bit less threatening. So actually right now we can have rook g7, which black can play, and then and actually in this position I would recommend that I don't think white has a win over here, because of the pawns are not as strong as in the last variation. So we have 5 pawns to black's 3, so that's not enough for pawn promotion threats. So what I recommend over here is just rook takes e6, exchange sacrifice. We can play knight c4 check, knight d6 check, knight c4, knight d6, and get a draw by threefold repetition. So if black doesn't want to get into that, then they have to give up their rook. So they can play h takes g5 instead. We can play knight takes g6, and then after taking we have hx g5, bishop d5, h4, and this position. I'll just show a few more moves in the sample line, and yeah, this should be a very interesting endgame. As I said, it looks pretty equal, and because white is only up 2 pawns, as well as these 2 pawns over here are pretty strong, I don't think white's going to be able to win this, and white will just try to hang on for a draw. White has to be careful not to lose their rook, as this bishop is cutting it off. So yeah, I think white should try to play for a draw over here. So you can see that the setup for white matters a lot, as in the last example of a sort of a sacrifice that black made, we had our pieces a bit better placed, and so the game looked a bit more favorable for us. So if I just go to that, I would say this position definitely looks more favorable than the position we're just looking at. So yeah, white has to set up their pieces as best as they can for the inevitable sacrifice that black is going to make, and then after that they have to be willing to play an endgame where they try to have pawn promotion threats and active pieces, but they have to accept the fact that they're never going to be able to get their queen and bishop out. So that's kind of how this game has to go. So see if there's anything else over here that I wanted to show. Yeah. Oh yeah, and so we looked at the 6 bishop d7 variation. So now I want to show a sideline that black also has in this development of the bishop, so they can play bishop b5 instead. So it's going to look very similar in the same sort of sacrifice as this this bishop over here is a light squared bishop, so it doesn't help in the sacrificing on f6. However, the placement of this bishop can lead to a slightly different game, so it's important. So I'm going to go through the moves a bit faster, as it's the same sacrifice and the exact same ideas, but a different placement. So actually over here, if we don't play e5, then black can get the bishop back to f8, and they can threaten on h6. But if we played e5, then that could still maybe happen, but because if the pawn takes the bishop, then our f6 pawn would be weaker. So but in this line I just have this happening, and instead of the bishop helping to sacrifice on f6, the bishop is now helping on h6. So we're going to see, and now the bishop comes over here, so to take the knight. And okay, so over here what we saw is that if we take with the knight and then bring the king back after bishop takes, we don't need to take with the, so you can see our setup over here is not the best with our rook still poorly placed, but So in the other line, we saw that we were taking with the pawn, so the e pawn was taking instead of the knight. But if we take with the knight, right, what we can do is we can use our pawns very well. So we can bring this pawn to g5, and if the bishop were to go back, then we would just trap the queen and bishop again. So the bishop has to take anyways. We take back, um, and um, and yeah. So if takes over here, then we take, and we're like, it's we're gonna win some material anyways. And this actually looks pretty good for white. So f6 is played. We take now rook e4 check, g4, bishop e5, takes. And it's worth noting that that see our rook is going to fall, but we don't really have that many moves that we could play. So for example, if we were to play rook g3, rook d8 kind of doubles, and we're going to have some trouble perhaps. So we can just go here. Knight takes d1. So in this position there are like many moves that can be played, but if we go for something with our bishops, this kind of position is playable for both sides. You can see over here we have a lot more pawns than black, so that's sort of the difference. So even this, when I'm showing you these moves in this sort of position, like specific theory is not as on promotion ideas. So if we go back, the reason we had so many more pawns is because we took back the sacrifice. Instead of with the pawn, we took back with the knight. I mean, in this position, we're losing the knight anyways. If we were to take, and also if the knight was defended, we could still black could still take, because if we're able to take back this rook, then after rook d6, black is going to get the ground anyways. But it's worth noting which piece you recapture with. So if we go back to the main line with bishop d7 over here, let's go back to our sample sacrifice over here. Well, actually over here, if we take back with the knight, the bishop takes the king, has no place to go. So let's say we played king h4 over here. If knight takes, then we go knight takes, bishop takes, and now we play g5. Let's see. Let's go bishop takes. Pawn takes. Now we have g takes f5. So actually over here we don't have a rook to take back on f5. But if we did, then that would be similar to the last line we had. Rook d7, bishop f2 to try and go to g3, f6 to free the pieces, g takes f6, f takes g4, bishop takes, the computer is saying. H takes g4, rook takes, knight takes, queen check, and computer says that this is drawn. It looks to be winning for white, but perhaps because it's actually it's this one's winning for black. So, but if we go back to this, if we have this is where the interesting part goes, because we have to find a good setup for white before black gets the sacrifice off. So maybe over here we don't play rook e2. Maybe what we do is instead we play rook e1 over here. Maybe after bishop d8 we can try king h4, takes, check here, bishop takes, f takes. Well, actually, because our bishop is still blocking the rook, so if we go back a couple of moves, we play bishop g2 instead. Now bishop d8, king h4, takes, So here we have g5 on the board, takes, takes, and now maybe g takes f5 because rook takes f5, and then the rook is also aimed at the f6 square. So maybe after here we have f6 like was in the other line. E takes f6. E takes. Rook takes bishop d5. Bishop takes. Rook takes. Rook takes d5 check. G4 c takes. And in this variation, so what we have over here is we have, I think this one is actually looks pretty good for white, but also black has definitely a lot of chances over here. So we can just play like rook f1 here. So yeah, bishop e6 is good. It kind of helps to block against this f7 move by us. Bishop f2, queen c8. Maybe rook g1 to defend this. King can even come in. Wonder if we can play this if it's too risky. No, bishop's going to take on g4. Because I want us to play our bishop to g3 and then like bring our bishop in. It's going to be very hard. Yeah, computer's saying rook e1 over here. So see, the computer thinks white is winning, but it's actually not so simple. Because the computer doesn't get that white's pieces are trapped over here. So actually both sides have chances. See, that's an interesting thing that I figured out on the fly over here is that we have this either knight takes or we have e takes ideas. So knight takes, if we have knight takes, we have endgame where we have more pawns, less pieces. If we play take with the pawn, then we keep our knight, but we in the variations, but we have a bit less pawns in the endgame. But as you can see, this position and maybe I haven't even come up with like the best sort of setup for white before black makes a sacrifice, because as you can see, at least for white, there is no like no theory. It's kind of just a sort of a setup that white has to create before black gets the inevitable sacrifice. So black has kind of theory as they have these moves that they have to make in order to get off the sacrifice and have their best pieces, but white can basically do any sort of setup in anticipation of a sacrifice. In anticipation for a sacrifice, but and if black doesn't want to sacrifice, black can be happy in with just getting the draw, because white can't do anything. So if black doesn't sacrifice, white is not in this line, white is not going to be able to do anything, so black can just move back and forth and get a draw by repetition. And so we've gone through all the theory I wanted to show for this variation. And so if we go back to the main position after knight e6, what would I recommend over here? So if we play f5, I mean, it's I quite like when I said earlier that I like the lines for black, what I meant is that I think in these lines, like they're very even and either side could win. So as white, you probably want to play theory where you're like at least like slightly better, or maybe have slightly more opportunities. Which was definitely shown in the other f4, the f4 line with c5 and d5. Well, that was basically, if you played it correctly, it could be most likely winning for white. But in terms of the c6 variation and stuff that we showed before, black got a very good position, but I think that white maybe could be like just slightly better, which is expected because they have the first move. I think white is maybe slightly better, like they maintain like a slight opening advantage for getting the first move. But I think with knight e6 after f5, it's kind of just like an even game, and black can even like force a draw if they want. So after knight e6, I would maybe recommend why it depends on the player. I would recommend playing f5. Like I'd play f5 sometimes, but also just be prepared to play like f3. As I showed before, you could even transition into e4 lines with if you play e4 next, and you can get into those sort of lines, and then you could like and you'll see the second video I made on this position is on the e4 line. So knight e6 is definitely a good choice for a good choice for black. So yeah, so that's sort of what and also I'd recommend. I showed other lines, like I showed knight d4 lines. I wouldn't recommend. I think that if you see if you're playing black and you see f5 on the board, you should just stick on g5 and play this position. So yeah, a little bit less theory based also. I know the 2 videos ago, this is 2 videos ago we had a war theory based one. This one is kind of a setup based position for white, and even for black, they have to make that setup for a sacrifice. So it's kind of a setup base for both sides, and then after the sacrifice, you play the middle game to end game that occurs after, which is very imbalanced and a lot of possibilities. And so yeah, this concludes part 3 on this theory with f4 for what's your decision custom position. Uh, and that's it. So that's all the theory I wanted to show for f4. But I have some other theory I want to show, which is actually you would think that like e4 would just be a better than e3, and that or either that or e3 would just be like a more passive sort of variation of e4. However, e3 is an extremely aggressive attacking move that is going to need at least a few videos, like a few videos to cover it as well for the theory. There's a lot of theory on that, so that will be coming up next, and then we'll have one video on G4 theory. But yeah, for now, that's it for now. Hope you enjoyed this video. Hopefully it was instructive for you, and I'll see you in the next